this is Aleksandra Rachitskaya from Cleveland Clinic Cola Institute, and I'm excited to welcome you to this episode of the new Retina Radio Journal Club, together with Buckle Society. I'm joined by my colleagues from across US. We have Dmitra Skondra from University of Chicago. Welcome, Dmitra.
Hello, thank you so much for having me.
And we have Dr. Emmanuel Chang from Retina and Vitreous of Texas. How are you, Manny?
Hey, good. Thanks for being here.
And we also have Michael Klufas from Wills Eye Hospital and Mid-Atlantic Retina. Mike, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Alexandra.
Well, it's great to have you guys on to discuss this very timely topic. We are going to summarize one of the studies that have been recently published, and then we're going to discuss this study as well with our guests. So the study we're going to focus on today is efficacy and safety of biosimilar FYB201 compared with ranibizumab and neovascular age-related macular degeneration. This is a publication by Frank Holz on behalf of the COLUMBUS-AMD study group, and it came out in May 2021 in Ophthalmology. So I'm going to turn it over to Mike to summarize the study for us.
Great. And as the title sort of foreshadows, this was a study whose purpose was to determine the clinical equivalence of this proposed biosimilar FYB201 and reference ranibizumab in patients with treatment-naive and subfoveal CNV caused by neovascular age-related macular degeneration. So it was a prospective multi-center trial that went on for 48 weeks. There were 477 patients, and they were randomly assigned to receive either FYB201, 238 patients, or reference ranibizumab, 0.5 milligrams. This were 239 patients by intravitreal injection. And the primary endpoint, which is important, was the change from baseline in best corrected visual acuity, ETDRS letters at 8 weeks prior to the third monthly intravitreal injection. They basically showed the main result was that there was a mean improvement of 5.1 ETDRS letters with FYB201 and an improvement of 5.6 letters in the reference ranibizumab at 8 weeks. And through some other key secondary endpoints, they basically showed that FYB201 is a biosimilar that's with reference standard to ranibizumab in terms of clinical efficacy and ocular systemic safety in patients with neovascular AMD. Some of the secondary endpoints included OCT measures of retinal thickness, proportion of patients with active CNV at 48 weeks, and proportion of patients with fluid-free macula during the study, and change in baseline total lesion area at 48 weeks. And I think some of us have also been concerned about some safety signals. So there was a pharmacokinetic analysis done in a subgroup of 60 patients, and there was also analysis done for anti-drug antibodies as well as neutralizing anti-drug antibodies as well.
So that's a great summary. Thanks so much for that. And as I mentioned, there's been a lot of discussion of biosimilars. So maybe before we dive into a deeper discussion of this paper, Dmitra, maybe you can update the listeners and the viewers on the difference between the biologics that we usually use in clinic for our neovascular AMD patients versus, what we think of generic drugs. Obviously, we don't have any generics for us. And what is a biosimilar?
So biosimilar is basically biologics, drugs that are very highly similar regarding physical, chemical, and biological properties to an already marketed drug. And then have to demonstrate that there is a biosimilarity based on studies with the reference medicine. And it's a relatively new concept. Well, generic is a medicine out of patent, and then any company can start making it exactly the same as the initial medicine. So it's not the same drug, but it's basically using the same mechanism. It have similar properties. They've been around in the rest of the other medical fields for the last 10 years, and they've been getting a lot of popularity, especially in the rheumatology world. There are a lot of biosimilars because these drugs are very expensive, and it's been a lot of issues with healthcare. But definitely it's a new frontier for ophthalmology and retina.
Yeah, absolutely. And just exactly like you mentioned, it's not a carbon copy of the reference biologic, be it ranibizumab or another biologic. And actually the company that develops it doesn't have the recipe that they follow. And that's why it's so important to do these trials. And in comparison, and we'll probably talk a little bit about money, it's to make a generic drug, it takes less time and less money than obviously to make the original drug. And biosimilars fall somewhere in between. These are not as easy to make or as cheap to make. And also they don't require as rigorous of a study to theoretically get approved. So Manny, maybe I'll ask you, what do you think about the outcomes, the primary outcome of the study?
I think it's great that there are these trials being studied and published to show that at least for visual acuity, for OCT changes and subretinal fluid reduction, we're seeing comparable efficacy. The hardest thing I think with these biosimilars is figuring out the stability of the formulation. When we store these drugs, do we have to store them in different environments? If we keep them around for several months, do they have the same shelf life as what we're used to? Those things are important. The other thing is, as we see, as Dmitra mentioned, we have biosimilars in rheumatologic drugs. While they're very efficacious and they work well and they are cheaper, there are reports that some of these biosimilars have a little bit more skin reaction at the injection site compared to the branded drugs. And whether or not those types of formulation issues, stability issues will play out, time will tell.
Excellent points. So we are going to take a little bit of a break, and then we are going to talk a little bit more about this particular study and about biosimilars in general. Hi, this is Aleksandra Rachitskaya, and I'm back with the new Retina Radio Journal Club together with Buckle Society, and I'm joined by Dmitra Skondra, Emmanuel Chang, and Michael Klufas, and we're talking about biosimilars. So we're talking about one of the biosimilars that was compared to ranibizumab, and there's been some other studies done, in particular in India, looking at biosimilars. So maybe I'll ask you, Dmitra, where do you see biosimilars fitting in, and why is it a conversation that we're having now?
So I think that biosimilars is going to be how much they're going to in kind of like a big significant part of the retinal practice based on two factors. I think it's going to be, number one, the price and how that compares with the actual original drug or the other compounded, like in particular bevacizumab, and number two, the country and the healthcare system. So if there's a healthcare system that does not have access to compound drugs, like in India, for example. And also if there's like a healthcare system that the insurance companies kind of like determine what drug the doctor will have to give and only give another option based on cost and profitability if this doesn't work. So I don't think it's going to be one size fits all. I think we're going to see different incorporation once safety and efficacy is confirmed in different markets, in different practices, in different healthcare systems.
And as you mentioned, we in some of the countries, and for example, India, where there is more widespread use of biosimilars as we speak, they don't have an option of Avastin being used in these conditions. Manny, what do you think is going to be the role that Avastin is going to play when we talk about biosimilars in retina?
It's a great question, and I think it really comes down to price point. Obviously, the healthcare costs are skyrocketing. If you compare rheumatologic biosimilars, they're on average 30% less than the branded. If that plays out in our field, it's still, the Lucentis biosimilars will be still significantly more than Avastin. And so then the question comes down to is how will payers perceive this? How will patients also perceive this? So it's a great question. I don't know.
Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I think that, the payers, they see this massive number of patients that continues to increase. And the other key point is we keep doing these recurring therapies. And so if it's 10%, 20%, 30%, 40% cheaper than a branded drug, recurring treatment over time, that adds up to a lot to an insurer. And so that's where I think they really see the value, not in the individual price, but in the long term over those repetitive treatments for that patient.
And we talked about before the break a little bit about safety. And the study that we're talking about didn't show any concerning safety signal. But let me ask you, maybe Dmitra, what's going to make you feel comfortable? Let's say you have an option to do whatever. You're not mandated by insurance company or any other way to use biosimilar. What is going to make you feel comfortable since these drugs are not going to be studied for as maybe in detail as the original biologics?
I think the studies like the one that we just discussed is a good start, but it's definitely not enough regarding numbers. I would like to see studies with more long-term outcomes, how the vision, because we know even with our regular medications that the vision declines after a few years. So we need to make sure that the vision outcomes are the same, the safety outcomes are the same with larger numbers, and also the ability in real life that many of us treat and extend, that we don't do monthly injections for everybody for a year. If we can extend these patients, like if we can actually take advantage of the fact that we have a cheaper drug and give equal number of injections, or you have less price, but they have to inject them every month to maintain the same effect that I can do with treat and extend with another drug.
Yeah, and I think it's a good point because there's so many new approaches to, we're talking about neovascular AMD in this case, but these biosimilars theoretically are going to be, if they become approved, they're going to be approved for all indications. So we have so many novel approaches where we're talking about extending that interval, right? And with a study like this, they're looking at monthly injections really at this point.
Yeah, the other interesting thing is, we look at Avastin as our generic now, and if you look at AMD, DME, and RVO, Avastin probably has the lowest difference from ranibizumab or aflibercept in AMD, but then the difference separates at earlier time points, especially in DME, and then RVO. There's been the Lievo SCORE2 trial, and so it's interesting they chose to study the biosimilar in AMD first, because I would expect the difference to be smaller there than the other conditions.
And the other thing I wonder is more on the payer side is, currently a lot of these branded drugs, we have copay assistance programs that are funded by the companies. The question is, will these biosimilar companies pursue similar avenues? Because even if it's 30% cheaper, that still can be quite a bit if the insurance won't cover all of it unless they make a standard statement saying we'll cover all of it. We don't need a copay assistance program. Otherwise, these biosimilar companies will have to find a program in state to allow that.
Yeah, I think the cost, the safety, and the availability of the other drugs that we have is going to really determine where biosimilars are going to fall. And as we mentioned earlier, these drugs are not cheap to manufacture, to develop, to manufacture, and to study. It's a rigorous process. So it's going to be interesting to see where this develops in US and ex-US. Well, I appreciate you guys participating and talking about this important topic. And please join us for future episodes of the new Retina Radio Journal Club together with Buckle Society. Take care.